What's up, y'all? In this section of the Residential Locksmith Starter Series for Weiser Lock, we are going to be going over all the deadbolts from the old fella that we did in the last video, all the way up until they changed over to the Kwikset Based frame, which will be a whole separate video, which will pretty much be a copy of the Kwikset video. However, in this video, we're going to talk about all the minor changes that happened through the years with the Weiser Deadbolts. Now, initially, I was going to do the next generation of knob and deadbolt like we did the first one. However, there's so many kind of variations and they kind of change throughout the years. So what I'll do in this video is do the deadbolts. In the next video, we'll do the doorknobs, and then we'll do handle sets and the Weiser bolt and stuff like that. So as I mentioned in this video, there's going to be very slight changes throughout the years of the deadbolts, starting with, again, this old fellow that had the 1/2-inch latch. The next thing they did with that was they came out with the full 1-inch latch, and I didn't mention this in the other video, but yes, they did have the 5-inch back set, old school. That's actually a drive-in style latch, but yes, they did put in 5-inch back set deadbolts back then. From that old style, they went to the bigger format when they started drilling bigger holes. Now, I will mention one great thing about Weiser deadbolts, even all the way up until just the current versions of them, they all fit the 1.5 or 1 5/8 holes. You can take any generation of deadbolt, you take this off the door, and you can come in with any variation of them, and it'll go right into the hole. Almost no modification needed unless the latch was not drilled deep enough for that, which is pretty common with the older style because it had such a short latch. And then when they came along and made other latches, see how much longer they are. So sometimes they didn't drill deep enough for the latch hole for the for that to convert. But as far as the 1.5 hole, all the way up, even in the new generation, the Kwikset style will fit an 1.5 hole, almost no problem. And again, this one was made for the bigger holes. Screw on the inside, screw on the outside. Same exact thing that we talked about in the last video. One of a few of the minor changes that they made throughout the years, going from like the 60s all the way up until the early 2000s when they changed over to the Kwikset Based frame. The minor changes were, there's always been kind of two versions of it. They had the crown version, which was the knob and the deadbolt. The crown version is this. And they are always, you could always tell what it was because they're kind of sealed up here. Now this one, you could pop this clip off and pull the cylinder out. But later on, as you can see here with this crown, they made it so that was not possible. It's peened in from the factory. You can't remove the whole cylinder. So another change that they made was they went from the flat tailpieces that we showed in that other video where they were flat, and they changed it to this kind of a half moon shape. One side's rounded, the other side's flat, and obviously, just like with the Schlage deadbolts, the flat goes to the flat when you're putting it together. So that was one change, and during that time, they made the change. If you look real closely, we need a little pointer here. You see the retainer pin on the flat style tailpieces from the 50s to the 70s era. The retainer pin was up here at like a 1 o'clock position. When they made the change to the different style tailpiece, they shifted it over to this 3 o'clock position. That, if you deal with a lot of old Weiser, that can be an issue when you're switching out a plug. You have to watch it because one thing, they did last a really long time, but the one thing that would happen is just from heavy use, the holes would get wallowed out. So frequently, I keep, because we see so much of it, I keep plugs on hand, just little plugs out of deadbolts, and or the complete cylinders with the tailpieces already attached. And when I'm rekeying a house, which actually just happened the other day, they had a handle set. You might ask, why aren't you just replacing it, Jake? Well, because they had a handle set with a double-sided deadbolt. On the handle sets, they have this decorative escutcheon. So unless you have the exact same thing, which they don't make a lot of these same footprints anymore, then you're really left with just repairing it. So basically what had happened was the interior, just from using the key, was worn out. And hey, I have a whole bag full of really good condition cylinders, so I just switched the cylinder and or the core out. No big deal. Just rekey it, carry on with your life. Tell them, hey, it's an extra, you know, $20 charge or whatever. And you can make an extra 20 bucks for a part that, you know, you already have on hand. One difference with the thumb turns. The thumb turns kind of started off, as you can see, with this old fella. It had the 2 screws on the inside that directly attached to the screw post. And then when they made them bigger, they have the same thing there. But then they came along and they changed it to this style that had a 2-part. Now, I don't know why they did this, but it has a 2-part thumb piece, 2-part interior. So you had to remove these little screws right here, which are 8/32 screws, which you can take screws, the Schlage bi-metal screws, metal wood screws, and you can cut the tip off and use them for that. But that's how it was. And that basically retains a heavier screw for the deadbolts versus I don't know why they did that. But from like the late 70s all the way up until they changed it, even the newest ones, newest being 2000 model, had that same style, cap style thumb turn, except for, going back to this fella, except for the decorative ones. The decorative ones usually had the exposed screws, just the 2 screws with the solid thumb piece. The latches were kind of weird. There was this version back in the day. This is very heavy solid brass. They called this the extra heavy duty. If you flip through one of these are all 90s catalogs, but they called this the extra heavy duty deadbolt. And you take it off and it had this hex screw. That's just a little bitty tiny short screw that holds that cylinder in. Had the flat style tail pieces with the 1 o'clock position and that square latch. Now when they changed over, they didn't go immediately to this adjustable latch that was used for a long time, but they did manage to go. They had some, let's go ahead and take this off because the tail pieces on this one were strange. For a while there, they had some kind of weirdo tailpiece system, but I've never understood. The only reason I can come up with this flat, you see how this latch was flat on the edges compared to this, and I've talked about this in other videos not related to this series, but back in the day they made thin bar doors and you had to have a narrow latch to go into that door because this 1-inch diameter wouldn't fit. Have a lot of problems nowadays with that, where the Kwikset lock goes out, because Kwikset fixed latches were 7/8 inch diameter, and all new Kwiksets have this adjustable 1-inch, and they won't go into the edge of the bar door. We see that very often. So I'm assuming this was a response to that problem, because this had the flat edges and went in fine. But if you look at these, like I said in the first video, all of it's rekeyable. You know, you use this guy. You had the Weiser tool right here with the regular end, and then you had this tooth style. Talk about that in a second. But for a while, when they switched away from these flat tail pieces and they went to the half moon style, I'm just going to call it half moon style, they had these weirdo cylinders. So one thing about these is you did have to unscrew each one of these screws, and there's a little bitty part in there that you had to be careful when you're putting this back on. You had to make sure the flat was up, because otherwise it just would not work right. So when you were rekeying this guy, you actually had to take these long screws out, and we'll go ahead and do that real quick, because this was one of the only Weiser Deadbolts that did not need the cap tool. And they were actually a little bit weaker. Again, I don't know why they went to this style for a while. It wasn't out for very long, but it was out there, and I still run across them every so often. Take that off, and we can see this little guy right here, this little disc, and the tailpiece went through that. It was retained by that, and then it sat in that little disc just like that. So when you were rekeying these guys, you kind of had to watch out for that problem. And again, this part or your regular cap removal tool would work right up until for some odd reason. You never know why they do these things, but for some period of time between when they had regular teeth, they switched over to these toothy tooths. I don't know why they did that, but that's what this end is for. It goes in that because this style just wouldn't work. So that is why the green tools from Weiser are double-ended and had that, because of that tooth style. And they were actually pretty problematic to deal with too. So if you don't have one of these and you run across one of those, obviously you can't get your fingers in there, and it's really hard to unscrew. That's pretty easy solvable. Is just unscrew the screw holding the cylinder in, and you can drop the cylinder out just like that, and then use a poker and unscrew it with your fingertip. But that is exactly what those teeth are for, to bite into those weird teeth. I want to say 70s era was that, maybe. One other thing about Weiser Corporation is they had this etched finish. See how it's kind of got this, it's a rough finish. 5E is what this finish was. It was the etched style. Typically it had smooth on the inside, but with these handle sets, they did have a couple of different features. One of them had this retaining ring. See this big retaining ring right there? Typically you would find this on the full trim handle sets. When I say full trim, let's say that just holds that guy in. Full trim handle sets on the outside, instead of it being two pieces with the thumb thing and the deadbolt up here, it was a full body trim. And they had this clip on there, so you ended up, to get this off the door, you ended up having to take everything off, which is problematic sometimes, because like if the bottom handle set screws are painted over or stripped out, you will have a problem with it. Now, I will also mention before we move over and show you one thing, when they shifted over to the double cylinder deadbolt style like these guys, they started sending out non-removable head screws. They had one-way screws on them, and I've got one set up over here. It was ridiculous. I mean, to this day, I've never seen somebody unscrew a deadbolt from the inside to break out. I don't know why. Maybe they did that thinking, you know, if you had like a two hotel rooms side by side and you had a door that split them, maybe that's why they were going for that whole theory. But for years, from like the 70s all the way up till this, they had some non-removable screws. I think I covered everything except for the fact, yes, and I didn't mention this in the last video, yes, you can key any generation knob or deadbolt to a Kwikset key, because Kwikset will fit in to the Weiser lock. You cannot key a Weiser key to a Kwikset lock, but you can take a Kwikset key. Look at that, that's mastered. No, it's not. You can easily key this up to a Kwikset key. 4, maybe 6. Yeah, 4 again. Using Kwikset spacing and depths. 5 and 3 looks like. Would key up just fine. Where'd it go? 2 Kwikset keys. Now, of course, as I mentioned in those other videos, Weiser has stopped exporting to the US. So if you have up until this, if you had a house, it was very common for people with a bunch of Weisers to buy Kwikset locks when their Weisers broke, because that's all they could find at the hardware store or whatever. So in that case, you do have to come along and rekey everything to Kwikset. Now that Weiser is switching strictly to the smart key frame and not exporting to the US, presumably if you run across Weisers and you don't want to put in the replacement Weiser master or whatever, you would have to go change everything to a Kwikset key. All right, let's go ahead and do this real quick. The good old Weiser one-way screw. That's right. They would send these in the screw packs, and invariably somebody would put it in for no particular reason. So come along and bam, there you go. You got that to deal with. However, they weren't as bad as some other non-removable screws. Typically how I approach these is just with a flathead. 80% of the time, you can put enough pressure on this guy for your flathead to bite and unscrew it. One thing that kind of helps with that is you can actually tighten, if you've got one regular and one non-removable, is actually you can tighten this down. Now, builder's lumber, so it's solid wood, but on some doors that'll flex that wood enough to actually break loose a little bit this guy. But yeah, just a regular flathead screwdriver, and look at that. So it broke it loose enough for you to actually unscrew. Now this was tight, so I'm going to show you. Let's back this guy off a little bit. Yep. And then we're going to tighten this back down, just so you know it wasn't rigged. Okay, so now again, see, that's super tight. So I'm going to come back over here, tighten this down. Now if you had two of them, yeah, that's more of a problem, but put enough forward pressure on it and you could usually get it to unscrew just like that. However, sometimes you had to go to the specialty tool. That's right. That's a two post basically. And basically what that does is just let you unscrew these guys a little bit better, because instead of slipping off that ramp, the posts just kind of bite into it. So we're going to tighten that back down. Let's loosen this. Nope. Come on. There we go. Now this side is tight, and pressure, just heavy pressure usually will get it. So boom. Now this is an old guy. I don't know who made this one, but this one came in a set 6/8, 8/10, and 10/12. 8915 one-way screw remover. This one's probably not made anymore. I think I looked for this about 5 years ago to see if they were still made, and I don't think they are. But somebody probably makes them out there. Anyway, that's it on Weiser Deadbolts. Next video will be on knobs. Got a bunch of them down here that we're going to go through, and then handle sets, and then the Weiser bolt, which was kind of a fascinating piece of architecture. So anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll catch you next. Well, yeah, whatever.